The horse came in lame at noon, and that was already trouble enough. Cole Harlan did not need more. He knelt in the dirt of his yard, pressing 2 fingers along the animal's fetlock, listening to the horse breathe through its nose like it was trying to decide whether to trust him. The sun came straight down, with no mercy. Dust sat on everything. The cattle in the back pasture had not moved in an hour. Then he heard boots on the ridge behind his barn. Not the sound of a man walking. Something lighter. Something careful. The kind of step that had learned to be quiet the way most people learn it, not from habit, but from need. He did not reach for his rifle. He finished checking the horse's leg, stood up slow, and turned around. She was standing at the edge of his property, where the dry grass met the flat stone. Her clothes were travel-worn and torn at the left sleeve. She had a cut along her jaw, not deep, but not old either. Maybe 2 hours old. Her dark eyes moved across his yard in the way a person's eyes move when they are counting exits. He said nothing. She said nothing. The horse snorted. She was Apache. He could see that clearly. Her hair was loose and tangled from riding or running, and she stood with the kind of stillness that is not calm, but control. There was a difference. Cole knew the difference. He said, "You need water." It was not a question. She looked at him for a moment that stretched past comfortable. Then she said, "Yes." He pointed at the well. She walked to it. He watched her drink and watched her not turn her back to him the whole time. When she was done, she set the tin cup back on the post with 2 hands. Steady, like she was placing it, not dropping it. He said, "You running from somebody?" She looked at the ridge she had come from. She looked at him. She said, "I need a place to stay." One night. Cole looked at his barn. He looked at the ridge. He looked at the woman standing in the middle of his yard with blood on her jaw and boots worn down to almost nothing. His wife had been dead 14 months. The house had 3 empty rooms. The barn had a clean corner with good hay. He said, "Barn's open. There's food on the stove." She nodded once, walked toward the barn, stopped at the door, and looked back at him. She said, "My name is Naya." He said, "Cole?" She went inside. He stood in the yard for a long moment, looked at the ridge again. Nothing moved up there. No dust trail, no glint of metal. Nothing that he could see. And that did not mean nothing was there. He picked up his rifle from where it leaned against the fence post and went inside to add more to the pot on the stove. The town of Red Creek sat 11 miles east, and Cole had not been there in 3 weeks. Not since the day he had gone for flour and come back with the news that the Barton brothers had been asking around about a woman seen crossing the flats alone. The sheriff, a man named Vic Grady, had stood outside the general store with his thumbs in his belt and said the woman was wanted for theft and worse, and that anyone hiding her would find themselves on the wrong side of a federal warrant. Cole had bought his flour and come home. He had not thought about it since, had not needed to. Now he set a bowl of beans and salt pork on the barn floor just inside the door and knocked twice on the wood and walked away. He did not go back until morning. She was awake before the sun. He could hear her moving in the barn when he came out to draw water. He poured a second cup of coffee and set it on the fence post nearest the barn door without saying anything. When he came back from the pasture an hour later, the cup was empty and sitting exactly where he had left it. They ate breakfast without much talk. She sat on the far end of the porch step with her back to the post, and he sat on the other end with his coffee. The morning came in pink and slow off the flats. Somewhere past the ridge, a coyote called once and went quiet. He said, "That cut needs cleaning." She touched the side of her jaw. She said, "It's fine," he said. "It'll go bad by tomorrow if it isn't cleaned." She looked at him, He looked at the hills. She said, "All right." He brought out the tin box where he kept the cloth strips and the bottle of medicine his wife had always kept stocked. He sat across from her on an overturned crate and cleaned the cut without talking. She did not flinch. Not once. Her eyes were on the middle distance the whole time, focused on something past the barn, past the ridge, past whatever was chasing her. He tied off the cloth strip and sat back. He said, "Those Barton men are looking for somebody." Her eyes came back from the middle distance and settled on him. He said, "I heard it in town 3 weeks back. Sheriff Grady put the word out. He said the woman was Apache and that she'd come across the South Flats. She did not move." He said, "I'm not asking what you did or didn't do." She said, "Then why are you telling me?" He said, "Because you should know what's coming." The coyote called again from the ridge, and this time it did not go quiet. It called twice more, and Cole set his coffee down and looked hard at the tree line. Birds scattered off the top of the ridge like something had moved through them fast. His hand went to the rifle on the porch. He said, "How far behind you are they?" Naya stood up from the step and looked at the same tree line. She said, "Closer than I thought." Cole stood. The dust came first, then the sound of horses. Then 3 riders cresting the ridge with the morning sun at their backs, riding down toward his yard with the kind of unhurried pace that meant they were not worried about who was watching. Cole put himself between the riders and the barn door. He did not say anything to Naya. He did not need to. The riders pulled up at the edge of the yard. The one in front had a badge on his chest and a long rifle across his saddle. The other 2 did not have badges. They had the kind of faces that had stopped apologizing for themselves a long time ago. The one with the badge said, "Morning, friend. We're looking for a woman. Apache. Seen her in the area." Cole said, "You're on private land." The man with the badge smiled. It did not reach his eyes. He said, "That's so. Well, we'll only be a minute." Cole's hand was loose at his side. The rifle was still on the porch behind him. The distance between his hand and that rifle was about 4 steps. He knew exactly how many steps because he had lived on this land for 11 years, and he knew every inch of it. The riders knew nothing about this land at all. He said, "I said you're on private land. I'll say it once more." The smile on the man's face went flat. The 2 men without badges moved their horses slightly apart from each other, spreading out the way men do when they are preparing for something. Cole looked at them both. The morning held very still. The man with the badge said his name was Deputy Cal Rutherford, and he said it the way men say things they want you to be impressed by. Like the name itself was supposed to end the conversation. He had a lean face and a sunburned neck, and the kind of eyes that stayed half closed even when he was paying attention. The 2 men with him had not introduced themselves. Nicole did not ask. He said, "I don't have any woman here." Rutherford leaned forward on his saddle horn and looked past Cole at the barn. He said, "You mind if we look around then?" Cole said, "Yes, I do mind." Rutherford's jaw moved slowly, like he was chewing on something that was not there. He said, "There's a federal warrant out on this woman. Obstruction makes a man liable, friend." Cole said, "I'm not your friend. And you don't have papers showing me that warrant. You got paper, you show it. You don't got paper, you ride back the way you came." The 2 men without badges shifted in their saddles. The one on the left, a heavy-set man with a gray bandana around his throat, looked at Rutherford. Rutherford looked at Cole. Behind Cole, the barn was quiet. Rutherford said, "We'll be back with that paper before sundown." Cole said nothing. On the 3 riders turned their horses, and went back up the ridge at a walk. Not in a hurry. Making a point of not being in a hurry. Cole watched them until they dropped over the other side of the ridge, and the dust settled back down. He picked up his rifle and went into the barn. Naya was standing in the far corner behind the big workhorse, which had put itself between her and the door without being asked. She had her hand on the animal's neck, and the horse was breathing steady. Cole had raised that horse from a foal. It did not do that for strangers. He said, "They'll be back with paper or without it. Probably without." She said, "I know." He said, "You want to tell me what the warrant is for?" She looked at him. The barn light was low, and the dust from outside was still settling through the air. She had her jaw set the way people set their jaw when they are deciding how much of the truth is safe to spend. She said, 3 months ago, there was a man. He worked the trading post at Corda Springs. He was taking money from Apache families that came through, telling them it was a government fee. There was no fee. I took the money back. Cole said, "You took it back." She said, "All of it." And I broke 2 of his fingers. Cole looked at the ceiling of the barn. He said, "And the warrant says theft and worse." She said, "The man had friends in the county office." Cole sat down on the hay bale against the wall. The horse turned its head and looked at him. Naya stayed where she was. He said, "How long have you been running?" She said, 6 weeks. He said, "Alone?" She did not answer that. Which was an answer. He rubbed his hand across his face and looked at the barn door. The light outside was getting higher and warmer. Mid-morning. Rutherford would ride to the nearest telegraph office, which was in Red Creek, which was 11 miles. Round trip plus waiting for a response would take most of the day if he was doing things the legal way. Cole did not think Rutherford was doing things the legal way. He said, "Can you ride hard?" She said, "Yes." He said, "I've got a horse I can spare. Not fast, but steady. There's a settlement 2 days south called Mira Canyon. There's a woman there named Clara Webb who runs the supply house. You tell her Cole Harlan sent you. She won't ask questions." Naya looked at him. She said, "Why are you doing this?" He looked at the ground between his boots. He thought about the 14 months since his wife had died. He thought about the trading post man and his false fees. He thought about the 6 weeks of running. He said, "I'm not doing anything except lending a horse." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The man at the trading post. His name was Dale Purdy. He has been taking from Apache families for 4 years. I was not the first to try to stop it. But I was the first one the law believed enough to come after." Cole stood up. He said, "That'll keep." He went to the back stall and began saddling the roan mare that had belonged to his wife. The horse was calm under his hands. He worked the cinch and checked the saddlebags and put in 2 days of food and the water skin and the small box of matches and the folded map of the South Territory that he kept in the tack room. Naya watched him work without speaking. When he was done, he led the mare to the barn door and looked out across the yard and up at the ridge. Nothing yet. He handed her the reins. He said, "Stay off the main trail until you're past the Second Creek crossing. There's an old cattle road that runs parallel about a 1/4 mile west of the main trail. It's overgrown, but passable." She took the reins. She looked at him. She said, "The man who sent those riders is not just Rutherford. Rutherford works for someone in the county office. Someone who wants this quiet." Cole said, "I figured." She said, "That means this does not end when I ride out." The morning was very still. Somewhere past the ridge a hawk turned in a slow circle, riding the heat coming up off the flats. He said, "I know." She put her foot in the stirrup and swung up smooth. The mare accepted her without trouble. She sat there for a moment, looking down at him. She said, "Cole Harlan." He said, "Yeah." She said, "You are either very brave or very foolish." He said, "I've been told both." She turned the mare toward the back of the property, where the fence had a low spot. Cole watched her go. She reached the fence, stepped the horse over it without slowing, and moved into the brush at a long, easy trot. He went back into the house and loaded both his revolvers and the spare rifle. Then he sat on the porch and drank what was left of his morning coffee and watched the ridge. He did not have to wait long. It was not yet noon when the dust came back over the ridge. This time, there were 5 riders. Rutherford was in front again. The 2 men from the morning were on his right. 2 new men were on his left. They came down off the ridge faster than before, no more playing at courtesy. Cole set his cup down. He stood up from the porch chair. He did not go for his rifle yet. Rutherford pulled up harder this time. The horse threw its head. He said, "Where is she?" Cole said, "Who?" Rutherford's half-closed eyes opened a little. He said, "You are making a serious mistake, Harlan." Cole said, "I've made a few." The 5 horses stood in the yard, and the dust from them drifted slow across the fence. The heavy-set man with the gray bandana had his hand on his holster now, not drawing, just resting there, making sure Cole could see it. Cole looked at him. He said, "Move that hand." The man looked at Rutherford. Rutherford did not say anything. The man moved his hand. Rutherford said, "She is a fugitive under federal warrant. You are harboring. I can take you in right now." Cole said, You got that paper?" Rutherford reached into his coat and produced a folded document. He held it up without bringing it closer. Cole looked at it from the porch. Cole said, "Bring it here so I can read it." Rutherford said, "You can read it at the county office." Cole said, "I can read it here or we're done talking." The 5 men sat on their horses. Cole stood on his porch. The sun was straight up now, and the shadows were all pulled in tight underneath them. Rutherford folded the paper and put it back in his coat. He said, "I know she was here. I know you helped her. You got one chance to tell me which way she went." Cole said, "I want you off my land." What happened next moved fast. The heavy-set man went for his holster. Cole was already moving left off the porch step, dropping low, and the shot went over him and into the post behind where he had been standing. Cole came up with his revolver. He did not fire. He put the barrel at the exact level of the heavy-set man's chest and held it there, and the man stopped. Everybody stopped. The whole yard went still. Cole said, "The next man who pulls iron on my property is going to regret it for whatever time he has left." That's not a threat. That is a fact about what's going to happen. Nobody moved. Rutherford's jaw worked. He said, "You will hang for this, Harlan." Cole said, "You'll have a long ride before that conversation, deputy. Now you get your men and get off my land. Do it now. Do it slow." Rutherford held for a long moment. Then he pulled his horse around. One by one, the other 4 followed. They went back up the ridge, this time with a little less patience in the way they rode, which told Cole they were angry, and anger made men sloppy, and sloppy men made mistakes. He went inside and sent a telegram through the relay station south of his property, a small private line he shared with 2 other ranchers, to Clara Webb at Mira Canyon. He wrote, "Woman coming your way. Cole Harlan sends her. Treat her well." He sent it and sat back down on the porch. He thought about what Naya had said. This does not end when I ride out. She was right. It did not end. Naya made the first creek crossing before noon, and the second before the light began to go amber on the rocks. The mare was steady, like Cole had said, not fast, but honest under her, taking the broken ground without argument. The old cattle road was there where Cole said it would be, and barely more than a scar through the brush, but passable. She stayed on it. She had been running long enough to stop thinking about fear as a thing separate from herself. It had just become the background noise of every hour. What she watched now was the land, what it told her, where the birds sat, where they did not sit, which direction the lizards moved. The land out here talked to anyone who had learned to listen, and she had learned young. No one was behind her, not yet. She stopped at a dry wash and let the mare drink from the small puddle in the rock basin and looked back north. The sky was clean and wide. No dust column, no riders on the ridgeline. She thought about the man in his yard, Cole Harlan, a widower with a 3-room empty house and a horse with a good heart and eyes that did not have anything to prove. She had met men on the run in her 6 weeks of moving. Most of them were afraid of her in the way people are afraid of something they don't understand. A few had been worse than afraid. Cole had looked at her jaw, seen a cut that needed cleaning, and cleaned it. Then he had told her the truth about what was coming so she could decide what to do with it. She had decided wrong, maybe. She should have kept moving that first night. She had known there was risk in staying. But she had been running for 6 weeks on bad sleep and short water, and the cut on her jaw had been throbbing in a way that was going to become a problem. One night, she had told herself. One night had turned into a morning, and the morning had turned into Rutherford on the ridge. She hoped Cole Harlan was all right. She thought he probably was. He had the look of a man who had made his peace with bad situations. Not a man who enjoyed them, but a man who did not fold when they arrived. The mare finished drinking and lifted her head. Naya looked south toward the line of hills that meant the canyon country was starting. 2 days, Cole had said. She would make it in a day and a half if she pushed and the terrain stayed passable. She pushed. By nightfall, she was deep enough into the canyon country that the ridge lines above her were turning dark purple against the last of the light. She found a rock overhang and stopped there. She did not build a fire. She ate the dried meat from the saddlebag and drank from the water skin and sat with her back against the rock and the mare's reins loose in her hand. The night was cold, the way canyon nights are cold, sudden and total. She pulled her blanket and sat with it across her shoulders and listened. She heard it just after midnight, a single hoofbeat on stone, then silence, then another. One rider, moving slow, trying to be quiet. She stood and put her hand on the mare's nose. The animal went still. She crouched low and looked back along the trail. A shadow on the ridge above her, maybe 200 yards back and up. A man on horseback silhouetted against the stars for one moment, then gone behind a rock. Not Rutherford's group. They would have been louder, and they would have been more. This was one person who knew how to move in the dark over bad ground. She waited. The sound did not come again. She stayed crouched for 30 minutes. The mare breathed quiet and patient beside her. Nothing moved on the ridge. She thought about who it could be. Someone Rutherford had sent ahead. Someone who had been following her since before Rutherford, tracking her independently. Someone else entirely whose presence had nothing to do with her. She did not like any of those answers. She did not sleep. In the gray light before dawn, she saddled up and moved out fast, taking the canyon floor at a pace that was harder on the mare than she wanted but necessary. The rock walls rose on both sides, narrowing and then widening again. The trail bent left around a formation of red stone the size of a barn. She came around the bend and pulled up hard. A rider was sitting still on the trail ahead, facing her, not moving, waiting. The light was still low, and she could not see the face clearly. She could see the horse was a pale gray. She could see the rider had a rifle across the saddle. She did not reach for anything. Her hands stayed on the reins, visible. The rider said, "Naya." It was a woman's voice. She said it again. "Naya, Clara Webb sent me. You're safe." Naya let out a breath she had been holding for 6 weeks. The rider came forward, and the light caught her face. She was older, maybe 50, with a wide-brimmed hat and sun-darkened skin and eyes that moved the same way Naya's did, counting the exits and finding them all clear. She said, "I'm Lou Garrett. I work the relay station between here and Mira Canyon. I got the message from Cole Harlan this morning, and I came to ride you in." Naya said, "Someone was behind me last night, on the ridge." Lou said, "I know. That was my partner, Ray. He was making sure you got through the canyon without company. He'll join us at the canyon mouth." Naya looked back along the trail. The rock wall stood still and red in the early light. She said, "Cole Harlan sent a message already." Lou said, "He sent it yesterday afternoon. Man doesn't waste time." Naya was quiet for a moment. She said, "Is he all right?" Lou's expression shifted just slightly. She said, "He had some trouble with the deputy and his men. But he's standing. I heard from the Red Creek relay this morning." Naya nodded. The mare moved under her, restless and ready. She said, "What happens at Mira Canyon?" Lou said, "Clara Webb has been moving people through that settlement for years. People who needed to be somewhere other than where the law thought they were. She has contacts in the territory beyond the canyon that can get you documents. A new name. Work. A start." Naya said, "What does that cost?" Lou said, "Nothing you pay with money." Naya looked at her. Lou said, "You tell Clara everything you know about Dale Purdy and his operation at Corda Springs. Names, dates, amounts, how he ran it, who in the county office was protecting him. Clara has a man in the territorial capital who is building a case. Your account is the piece he needs." Naya said, "And after?" Lou said, "After, you disappear. Clean. The case moves forward without you in it. You become someone else in a town that doesn't know your history." The canyon was warming now as the sun found the top of the walls and began to come down. Somewhere above them, a hawk was working the updrafts, circling without effort. Naya thought about 4 years of Dale Purdy. She thought about the families at Corda Springs. She thought about the man who had broken because she had broken 2 of his fingers, and he had friends in the county office. She said, "All right." They rode south toward the canyon mouth where the valley opened, and Mira Canyon lay another 3 hours on flat ground. Lou Garrett rode beside her and did not fill the silence with talk, which Naya appreciated. The man called Ray came down off the ridge behind them at a distance and fell in as a quiet third. For the first time in 6 weeks, there was no sound of pursuit. Just the horses. The canyon. The hawk overhead turning in a slow and patient circle. And somewhere 11 miles north, a widowed cowboy was sitting on his porch watching a ridge with a loaded rifle across his knees, holding a line he had drawn in the dirt of his own yard, steady and without apology. Cole spent the afternoon fixing the fence line along the east pasture, which he had been putting off for 2 weeks. It was the kind of work that was good for when your hands needed to be busy and your mind needed to be quiet. He worked the wire and the posts and let the sun move across the sky, and did not think too hard about Rutherford or the county office or what came next. He thought about it anyway. Around 4 in the afternoon, his neighbor, a man named Pete Dolan, who ran cattle on the next spread east, came riding down the fence line and pulled up. Pete said, "Heard you had some trouble this morning." Cole said, News travels. Pete said, Manny at the Red Creek Relay told me. Said Rutherford came back through town looking like he'd bitten into a lemon. Cole worked the fence wire and said nothing. Pete said, Cole? Lee Rutherford works for Judge Cecil Aldis. You know that. Cole knew it. Cecil Aldis ran the county court and half the land dealings in the territory, and he had been running them for 12 years, and in that time the line between what was legal and what was his had gotten blurry enough that most people stopped looking at it. Cole said, I know it. Pete said, Aldis doesn't forgive being crossed. Cole said, I didn't cross anybody. I told a federal deputy to show me his warrant. That's the law. Pete said, Cole. The woman. Cole drove a post staple and looked up. He said, What about her? Pete said, Whatever she did or didn't do, she's got the wrong kind of attention on her. And now that attention is pointed at your ranch. Cole straightened up. He looked east across the flat country toward Red Creek. Unless the town was invisible from here, but he knew where it sat. He said, Pete, what do you know about Dale Purdy? Pete was quiet for a second. He said, runs the trading post at Corda Springs. Cole said, what else? Pete looked at his saddle horn. He said, I know there have been complaints. Families coming through. Money going missing in ways that weren't legal. I know nothing ever came of the complaints. Cole said, you know why nothing came of them. Pete said, Aldis. Cole said, Aldis. They stood with the fence wire between them and the late afternoon light going gold across the flats. Pete said, what are you going to do? Cole said, finish my fence line, then go inside and have supper. Pete said, Cole. Cole looked at him. Pete said, Aldis will send more than Rutherford next time. You understand that? Cole said, I do. Pete said, and? Cole said, and I'll be here. Pete looked at him for a long moment. Something moved across his face that was not quite worry and not quite respect, but lived somewhere between them. He said, I've got a boy works the telegraph at my place. If you need to get a message out fast, use my line. Cole said, I appreciate that. Pete rode back east. Cole finished the fence line as the sun went down. He went inside and made supper and ate it at the table where he and his wife had eaten 10 years of meals together. The house was quiet the way it had been quiet for 14 months. Not empty exactly, just still. After supper, he sat at the table and wrote down everything Naya had told him about Dale Purdy. Dates, amounts, the name of the man at the county office she had mentioned. He was not sure what he was going to do with it, but he had learned a long time ago that information written down was information that could not be taken away. He folded the paper and put it in the tin box behind the loose stone in the kitchen wall, where he kept the things that needed to stay hidden. Then he went to bed. He slept without much trouble. At dawn the next morning, he had 2 visitors he had not expected. The first was a man named Art Kinney, who was a lawyer out of the territorial capital and who had arrived on the night stage to Red Creek and ridden out to Cole's ranch in the dark. He was a small, dry man with a good suit and a worn-out horse, and the eyes of someone who had been lied to professionally for so many years that he could now detect it in under 10 seconds. He said, Mr. Harlan, my name is Art Kinney, and I represent a coalition of complainants in the matter of Dale Purdy and his associates in the county administration. I understand you have recently been in contact with a key witness in my case. Cole said, you want coffee? Art Kinney said, yes, please. The second visitor arrived 30 minutes after Art Kinney, and she was less expected than the first. Naya was standing in his yard. Cole stood on the porch with his coffee cup and looked at her. He said, I thought you were on your way to Mira Canyon. She said, I was. I am. I turned back. He said, "Why?" She said, "Because Lou Garrett told me there was a lawyer building a case. And because if the case is going to hold, my account needs to be sworn, and I can't give a sworn account from a place where I don't exist under my own name." She looked past him into the house where Art Kinney was sitting at the kitchen table. She said, "Is that him?" Cole said yes. She walked up the porch steps. She stopped beside him. She looked at him directly. She said, "If I do this, it is finished. Purdy, Aldous, all of it goes into a legal record and it becomes a thing that can be answered. But it also means I am here, under my own name, in the open." Cole said, "I know." She said, "Rutherford will come back." Cole said, "I know." She said, "Aldous will come back." Cole said, "I know." She looked at him, and he looked back, and the morning was very still around both of them. She said, "You are not afraid." He said, "I'm a little afraid." She almost smiled. It was a small thing, but it was there. She said, "Good. The ones who are not afraid at all are the ones who don't understand the situation." She went inside. Cole stood on the porch for a moment. The ridge to the north was clear. The sky was coming up blue and clean. Somewhere in the pasture his cattle were moving. He went inside and poured himself another cup of coffee and sat down at the table with Art Kinney and Naya, and the work began. It took 3 hours. Art Kinney had a leather case full of papers and a very precise way of asking questions. Naya answered them without hesitation. She had 4 years of detail stored in a mind that had been sharpened on 6 weeks of running, and she delivered it without drama, which made it more powerful than any version with drama would have been. Dale Purdy. Dates, amounts, names. The county clerk who had buried 3 separate complaints. That's the way Aldous had signed off on a federal warrant based on a theft charge filed by a man who had himself been stealing. Art Kinney wrote it all down. Then he had her sign it. Then he folded it into his leather case and closed the brass clasp. He said, "This is enough." Cole said, "Enough for what?" Art Kinney said, "Enough to go to the territorial marshal. Aldous has operated outside the county for years, but the marshal's office in the capital has jurisdiction over warrant fraud. This goes to them, not to any court that Aldous controls." Naya said, "How long?" Art Kinney said, "A week, maybe 2. The marshal's office moves when it has cause, and this is cause." Cole said, "And between now and then." Art Kinney said, "That is the part that concerns me." Outside the window, the horses in the corral moved. Not in alarm, just moving. Cole watched them anyway. He said, "Aldous knows Kinney is here." Art Kinney said, "Probably by tonight." Cole said, "Then we have tonight." He looked at Naya. She looked at him. He said, "You're not going back on the run." She said, "No." He said, "Then you stay, and we see what tomorrow looks like." Art Kinney took out his pocket watch and looked at it and put it back. He said, "Mr. Harlan, you are either a very principled man or a very stubborn one." Cole said, "My neighbor told me the same thing yesterday, more or less." He got up and started making lunch. Outside, the wind moved across the flats, and the hawk was back up over the ridge, turning in its slow and patient circle. Below it, on a ranch that had been quiet for 14 months, 3 people sat at a kitchen table and ate their lunch and waited for whatever was coming next. Now, without flinching, without running, with the sworn papers locked in Art Kinney's leather case and the rifles clean and loaded on the wall rack beside the door. The ridge stayed empty through the afternoon. But they all knew it would not stay empty long.